This is it. It's one word and it's a fascinating one. It does all kinds of things, including disappearing when we least expect it to, or serving no apparent purpose at all. And today we're going to find out all of the different ways that we can use that little pronoun es in German. And before you start clicking away to what you think might be more exciting videos, I'm willing to bet that there's a lot you didn't know about it. About es. Let's see how far you get before you learn something new. Grüß Gott, hallo, ich bin Billy Badger und das ist Bausteiner 3. Herzlich willkommen. Now we're going to start off easy and work our way up through 6 levels of it, 6 levels of es. So let me know in the comments just where for you the new stuff kicked in. Let's go. Los geht's. Level 0. First off, well, we have to include it. Es is a noun. Thanks to this guy here, our old mate Sigmund Freud. If you've heard of the ego, well, in German, of course, it's not called the ego, auch wenn man auf Deutsch egoistisch sein kann. In German, the ego is das Ich. It's that rational part of our psyche, whereas the id, or das Es, as it's called in German, represents our primal instincts, and together they shape our behaviour. But enough of that, we're here to talk grammar and not psychoanalysis. So level 1, pronouns. Let's start off with the obvious stuff. In English, if we refer to things with a pronoun, it's always an it. It doesn't matter what it is. If it's a thing, it's always an it. But in German, of course, even things have genders. So we need 3 separate pronouns, and I'm sure you'll know what these are. Let's skip over this quickly with 3 quick examples. The uni is feminine, so I'll say das ist die Uni, sie ist am Hafen. In this example, sie refers to the uni, which is feminine. Of course, in English, this would just be it. And here, this is the harbour in Hobart. Ist schön bunt. And this is a hotel. Es ist modern. So 3 different pronouns to refer to things that we would refer to in English with the pronoun it. I'm sure you're all still with me at this stage, so let's move on to level 2. Right, if you watched this video up here, then you know this already. If we want to refer to prepositional objects with a pronoun, then we don't actually use a pronoun. And since this sounds much more complicated than it actually is, let me show you what I mean. All of these verbs are used with a preposition, which means they have a prepositional object. So if someone asked me,
Kaufst du das Auto?
Ich weiß nicht, ich muss noch drüber nachdenken. I have to think about it. In English, we can use it along with the preposition about. We're thinking about it. But in German, we form a compound darüber, which means about it. And it's the same with the other verbs. Like, for example, with sich freuen. Kommst du auf die Party?
Ja, ich freue mich drauf.
She's looking forward to it. Where to it is rendered in German as darauf. Or maybe if we said ich warte darauf, we don't actually have any information to tell us what the person is waiting for. We're just waiting for it. There's no gender information either to indicate the gender of the thing we're waiting for. And the same thing happens with the verb abhängen, which we use with the preposition von. But this might be a good time to move on to, well, level 2.5 maybe, to show how we use the same form of it in an anticipatory kind of way, where the da compound doesn't refer to something that we've just been talking about, but rather something that we're about to mention. And this is something we don't do in English. Also bist du im Sommer wieder in Österreich?
Oh, das hängt davon ab, ob ich bis dahin genug Geld habe.
Ach so, yeah. This is a construction that we don't have in English. We'd just say, it depends on whether I have enough money. In German, we need an anticipatory da compound that refers to the thing, in this case, It depends on having enough money. Or another example might be, hast du gehört, was der Christoph gesagt hat?
Ich bin nicht einmal ein bisschen daran interessiert, was er gesagt hat.
She's not interested in the slightest in what he said. But to express this, we need a dark compound that anticipates the thing that she's not interested in. And this is the content of that subordinate clause, was er gesagt hat. So this could be tricky if we're used to the way that English sentences are formed, but let's move on now to level 3, the impersonal it. Well, we use an impersonal it when we're talking about the weather and time. For example, with verbs like es regnet, es hagelt, es schneit, where something is happening, raining, hailing, snowing. This is a subject that doesn't really refer to anyone or anything. It just refers to something that's happening in general. It introduces the verb. And we also use it actually with adjectives. Es ist windig, es ist sonnig, that sort of thing. Or, of course, if we're talking about time, we might say es ist 6 Uhr. But we know all of that, I'm sure. So let's see what else we can do that we can't do in English. If someone's knocking at the door, we might say es klopft. Literally, this just means it's knocking. But in English, we'd probably say someone is knocking at the door. Or if you saw a fire, you might say es brennt, which literally means it is burning, but it's the equivalent of something's burning or there's a fire. And then there's a lot of really handy verbs that we need to know that also have it as their subjects. And we've met a couple of them already. Let's see how many of these we know. Start off with this one. Es kommt darauf an, ob es heute regnet. It depends on whether it's going to rain today. Es handelt sich eine ziemlich persönliche Angelegenheit. It's about a fairly personal matter. Es lohnt sich nicht. It's not worth it, which is an interesting one, isn't it? As we have one it in German, but two in English. Okay, one last one. Es ist mir nicht gelungen, ihn zu überreden. I didn't succeed in convincing him. And notice here that there is no it in the English, but an impersonal one in German. And finally, one that we've been using for quite a while. Es gibt. For example, in Hobart gibt es viele gute Restaurants. In Hobart, there are a lot of good restaurants. Here, German uses a form of it, whereas in English, we use there is or perhaps there are. And we do the same thing with a number of other verbs where the es or it anticipates information in a subordinate clause. And this is similar, I guess, to what happens in English, where we use an it to anticipate a subsequent clause. But let's move on now to the next level, where we meet the mysterious case of the disappearing S, level 4. When we're expressing sensations or feelings, we often use what is rather confusingly called, I think, the dative of reference. But whatever it's called, you'll probably know this one already. If you're reporting feeling cold, you might say, es ist mir kalt. As we know, you're using the dative to say that this is the way that it feels to you, which is often what the dative is used for. Similarly, you might say, ich muss mich hinsetzen, es ist mir schwindelig. You're saying that you feel dizzy. And similarly, if you're feeling sick, es ist mir übel. Now, if you're familiar with this use of the dative, then you'll probably be more familiar with the same sentences with a different but simpler word order. Mir ist kalt. Mir ist schwindelig. And mir ist übel. Now, in each of these sentences, S has disappeared. And the dative construction has taken the place of the subject. So in effect, the word S was really only a placeholder in our original sentences and not a true subject, because it disappears when anything takes its place in the first position of the sentence. And this might be a good time to move on to level 5 because something similar happens here. Let's take these examples which have maybe a kind of literary flavor. Es kommt jetzt kein Bus mehr. Es bleibt am Ende der Woche nur wenig Geld über. Es finden im Sommer viele gute Volksfeste statt. Now, I'm sure we know what's happening here. The sentences themselves are not too complicated. No more buses are coming. At the end of the week, there's not much money left, and there are a lot of good festivals on in summer. But let's look at the structure a little bit more carefully. The first question then is, what is the subject of these sentences? You might say es. And if we look at the verbs, we can see that they do indeed agree with this subject, es, except when we get to the third sentence where we have the plural form of the verb stattfinden. What's actually happening is that the true subject, like the bus, the money, or the festivals, are rather uncharacteristically positioned towards the end of the sentence, away from the verb. It's the bus that's coming, or not, as the case might be. It's the money that we don't have left at the end of the week, and the festivals are what's happening in summer. And again, this word es is a kind of placeholder subject, because if we change the word order and put the true subject into the first position, our word es disappears. Kein Bus kommt. Nur wenig Geld bleibt am Ende der Woche über. Viele gute Volksfeste finden im Sommer statt. So instead of saying, hier wohnen 3 Familien, we might say, es wohnen hier 3 Familien. Es just introduces the sentence in which the true subject follows the conjugated verb. But let's move on to level 6, in which we meet the passive. Normally, the passive works like this. Die Beamten bearbeiten noch unseren Antrag. The clerks are working on our application. Now, we don't know who the people are who are still working on our application. It's those faceless people in offices, a bit like this one, and probably we don't really care too much. So we might just put this into the passive and say something like, our application is still being worked on. In German, we take the direct object and make it the new subject of our passive sentence. Unser Antrag wird noch bearbeitet. Well, so far so good. What happens if our sentence doesn't have a direct object, like in this example? Sie rauchen. They are smoking. Now, we don't know who they are. It's just lots of people. It would be a bit harder to put this into the passive in English, but in German we can. We just need a dummy, you guessed it, es, one that takes the place of the subject. Es wird geraucht. All this does is let us know what is happening, smoking. And similarly, if we were out and we saw some people celebrating, we could say Sie feiern, but we don't know them. And all we're interested in is this celebration that's going on. So we could say, es wird gefeiert. There's some celebrating going on. And it gets a little bit more complicated if the object of our original sentence is in the dative. For example, Sie helfen den Kindern. They help the kids. Now, maybe we are mostly interested in the fact that the kids are being helped. We're not so interested in who's doing it. So we could say, den Kindern wird geholfen. And it's a strange construction to most native English speakers. The children are being helped. And I notice that the verb is in the singular and we don't really have a subject. But we can give it one by using a placeholder es. Es wird den Kindern geholfen. The meaning stays the same, but since we need a subject in this new construction, we've acquired an S to do the job for us. Well, how far did you get? Did you make it to level 6 without learning anything new? And have I missed some levels? Maybe. Let me know in the comments below. Und inzwischen bedanke ich mich ganz herzlich dafür, dass du es bis ans Ende geschafft hast. Hoffentlich sehen wir uns in dem nächsten Video. Auf Wiedersehen und tschüss.